Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. We've got a special double-header guest today. Two folks, returning champion, getting his second Left Anchor appearance challenge coin. Franklin Bynum. You told us last time how we should refer to you. I don't know, the Right Honorable.
I'm not a stickler about it. I'm Franklin Bynum. I am also the judge of Harris County Criminal Court at Law number 8.
Okay, Your Magnificent Lordship, Mr. Right Honorable of Bynum.
Yes.
And
Number 8.
Number 8. Yes.
Yes. The 8th.
Yeah, which is the best one. Clearly, number 8. Always, that's a key. You can't be number 6 or number 9. These are clearly inferior. No. But we also have Bryan LaVergne. Am I pronouncing that right?
Oh, you're close. LaVergne. Yeah, like Laverne and Shirley. Bryan LaVergne.
Okay. Well, as I always say.
Well, Ryan is not allowed to go for a full episode without mispronouncing somebody's name. So thank you for giving him the chance.
And can you just introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners here?
Yeah, my name's Bryan LaVergne. I'm from Houston, just like a good buddy Franklin here, and I organize with Houston DSA, and I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America.
Awesome.
I think that and I'm Franklin Bynum, and I think that I'm also from Houston, and I think that really maybe a good beginning of the story is. And something that'll lead us along the way is that Bryan and I sat next to each other at both of our first DSA meetings, right? In November of 2016.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, we sat next to each other, and now, not long later in the scope of things, right? Going to the convention this week, each of us has, we each went to the convention, the DSA convention, I guess 2 years ago in Chicago, and didn't know anybody, didn't know what we were doing, and now going back.
Yeah,
together,
now we know everyone.
Done this big thing,
and we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, we know everyone. Still don't, never will.
I also joined in November 2016, and a purest coincidence. I can't think of anything that could have happened in November 2016 that would have convinced me that milquetoast liberalism is just not on the way out. So it was just...
It was a quiet month.
Yeah. That's true.
But that's some good context. But I thought, Franklin, maybe you could just give us a quick recap of the sort of, you talked in the last episode about the life of a judge, what that's like, whether you've sort of learned anything and how that maybe has kind of, affected your kind of, overall worldview or political thinking and so forth. Just what's it been like over the last little while?
Franklin, has the system captured you? Have you been captured? Have you been captured by the system?
Yeah. Yeah. So it is like a regular practice of trying to figure out as a colleague said to me recently, am I the man? Constantly having to ask, am I the man? And the answer still to me is no, even having cultivated that practice, but there have been times that I, really have made a serious inquiry. But I guess we should start earlier, right? Because multi-part episodes, right? You're not going to, why make someone
Plenty
go back?
Plenty of time.
So it's, I am from here. I spent many years as a criminal defense lawyer here in Houston. I was a public defender here in Houston, and the county was sued over its bail practices several years back now. And I had this feeling that this lawsuit was going to make a big difference, that the old system of detention was destroyed and there would be a new system built in its place, and that I was I could run for an office and do this, right? And make sure that the old thing is destroyed and make sure the new thing is not bad. Because, history is riddled with these examples of these lawsuits gone awry for two reasons, right? There's one that I've identified more because I was more familiar with it, and that is just generally the failure of civil rights litigation, the failure of federal courts in civil rights litigation to follow through on the actions that are necessary to make the change that you need a political follow through, right? Which failed in school segregation, by at this point all accounts, I guess the schools are still segregated. And there are so many illustrative examples, though, of that we can get to later about like that I find some instruction in. But the other failure is systems that are made by well-intentioned people that like are just too locked in in a way that they're not supposed to, right? And so like we set ourselves up to fail if we make these big systemic changes without like understanding like what the conditions are out in the world, understanding what's, feasible, what will work. I mean, yeah, I can sign on for, to be monitored by a federal court, right? But if the criteria that we set up for bail reform are like unattainable, right? Then we're just going to fail over and over again in ways that maybe even are superficial or not important. And so staying focused and doing it right, is also so important. One example that I go back to about the civil rights stuff is like the story of the Kansas City schools, where you had at some point, I don't even know what years, like the Kansas City school district, like had a cooperative school board, and then they had plaintiffs suing the schools to desegregate them. And like they set up these agreements where they were building high schools with planetariums, but they still weren't desegregated, but they were planetariums, and there was all these kind of bells and whistles, but like the thing that they set out to do was not done. So yeah, I've been in the weeds for like 6 months, and this is all a way to say that like we settled the bail lawsuit this week, right? Like I'm kind of like burying the lead, right? So we just finished last week this like 6-7 months of work to like settle the bail lawsuit, and it's the biggest bail lawsuit settlement in the history of the country. It is awesome, right? It provides all kinds of things that are effectively like aids to affected communities, aid to people moving forward, all kinds of lenience built in so people aren't being chained to chairs if they're late. And just like it's just one of the most comprehensive, biggest, most ambitious consent decrees in the history of the country. And we just did
amazing.
Yeah. But it took this long because we were so, had the same values as the plaintiffs that were suing us, they were friends. And then, but we both had really different ideas of how to do it and what we could lock ourselves into, And it's been a long few months.
Quite a learning experience. Must be exhausting, but hopefully in a very fulfilling fashion, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, Bryan's been along for it. I mean, the thing is that like, this is something that like, as much as anybody else, right? I mean, there are a handful of people that were like the most involved in the campaign, and Bryan is one. And like when the going got tough, I called Bryan about what to do, or what was important, or what all is happening, And this all started. I mean, to rewind, we went to our first DSA meeting and didn't know what we were doing, and at some point we're sitting around like, oh, someone needs to run for something, and these thoughts are coming up about the bail lawsuit and everything, and I'm like, well, I could do this, just like sitting around at a state and local meeting, Well, isn't that crazy to think about?
The first time you mentioned it, you were sitting on the couch and you're like, I should run for judge just as a gadfly. Like, let me just use this as a way to just talk about these things. And then you clearly start to thinking about it. It's like, wow, we could win. We could actually change something. And then, Friday happens and we get this official kind of agreement between the plaintiffs and the defendants. That's like, okay, well, Harris County, Houston, historically the death capital of the United States, and so many people to death row, a history of police violence, the TSU, they call them riots, but it's the largest mass arrest in Houston's history, 480-something students being arrested at TSU, a historically black college in Texas. Then we have the Black Panther Party 2, where cops killed a member of the Black Panther Party here, the People's Party 2 here in Houston. And then it all fast forwards. There's so much violence here. Then this is where potentially the beginning of getting rid of cash bail in the United States can happen. right? In Texas, right? The state where everything gets preempted. We have all these campaigns that DSA has worked on in Texas, in Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, where we've passed paid sick ordinances at the city level. That means if you're too sick to go to work, you have the right to not go to work and get paid for that. And then it gets attempted to be preempted at the state level, but they failed this past time. But, there's always a looming threat of, retroactive preemption from our reactionary state legislature. But they can't do that in a federal court consent decree. And that's what's so powerful about this. We have something that they can't touch, that it's in the federal courts, and it gives a powder keg to organizers, to leaders across the country to continue chipping away at cash bail. It's incredible. It's a big moment, in my opinion.
It's an incredible story of political change, and I think it's good that you're starting at the beginning and talking about where you're at now, because and that you mention the will and desire in the face of seeming impossibility, or at least unclear about what could be achieved other than knowing that in principle something needs to happen. There's a lot to talk about in terms of not just the specific facts on the ground that brought you here, but how kind of affectively, and I think it has to be collectively, you bring about both the desire, the will, and then, as you mentioned, Franklin, in the process, learn not just to care, but about how to actually effectuate the change through the knowledge you need to acquire in that process. So there's a lot to learn here for a lot of lefties.
Yeah, and what is so interesting is that a lot of the dynamics, maybe the conflict dynamics that play out in movement work, were then just playing out in county office buildings, right? Where, we're on the same side, right? But we have vastly different ideas of how to get there, right? And it gets personal real fast, right? Because we're lawyers, we fight for a living, or, you could just as easily say we're activists, we fight for a living, we're union organizers, we fight for a living, we all fight for a living, we fight to live, right? That's the system that we live in. And so yeah, it was something of, it was this dual thing, right? It was like, on the one hand, I'm like, oh, I know this. And the other hand, it was just like, oh God, like I know this, like I'm sick of this. But how else is it going to happen? People are going to disagree. The people are, and you just have to. These things, they take time. It just takes time to grind out something. They're like the way something. Right now there are like rules and processes. There are people that get out of bed, go to work, and like work in this system. And how do you change what they do every day, right? How do you tell it to them in words that they understand, And like, it's not, we have to be careful about not limiting the imagination, right? And by what's possible, right? As it looks to you right now. But it is also like really important to think about like what's possible, right? And when and how, and because if we do it and it's a failure because we just invent all new terms and do things kind of outside of everyone else's understanding, even the public's, right? The kind of the voting public, right? If we do something that doesn't, that like doesn't click for them in a way like that's really important, then we lose ground politically, right? We have to do the thing, have it work, and also have it like look like it's working, and those are separate things. So, maybe you've like caught me at a time in my life when I'm just like so deep in the weeds, I'm just like so deep in it,
This is this fascinating aspect, I think, in regards to when you talk about the question for leftist and electoral politics and how do we engage with electoral politics. I think, Franklin, your experience so far and what you've been able to achieve and how you're achieving that is a crucial thing for all of us to consider. This is one thing I like about DSA, right? This notion of an inside-outside strategy. Because far too often we're quick to disregard going into these institutions and attempting to use the power that's in there to do what's right. Do a judicial position, you just you just implement your values as a judge, right? You do what's right. You do what's lawful. You can play by the rules and get things done. But that's one individual. But within DSA as a movement and other organizations, we can act both inside and outside. So that's what I really like about Franklin's journey so far here, because it demonstrates someone who is from that outside of the institution going in, but then adeptly going through the motions, the methods of instantiating our vision of society. But at the same time, his activity inside allows me and other organizers and activists on the outside to ask for more. In fact, just recently, we're talking about in Houston on developing a campaign for cite and release, and it's based on the work that Franklin is doing. We're, going to employ the same tactics.
Can you explain, Bryan, what that is? Can you explain what that is?
Jargon giraffe,
right? So cite and release, as I would explain it, Franklin could describe more detail here, but it's kind of like when you think of a traffic ticket, a cop pulls you over and they say, caught you running the red light. And it's like, they print something out, you sign something, and then you leave. You're free because you're innocent, right? That's the law. Now, there are so many nonviolent misdemeanors that people get brought in to a booking center. They get brought into a jail. And here in Harris County, because of this settlement, because of this cash bail lawsuit, now we're able to have them, get processed and they leave. But they still get brought to a place. And they get brought into one place here in Harris County. And if you know Houston, Houston is big. You could be under the jurisdiction of being brought to the JPC, which is it's called. It's the one place we bring everybody here. You could be living in Katy or I guess Baytown or somewhere south of Houston, and it's real far away. You get arrested. They bring you in. They process you, and then they kick you out. Now, for all these nonviolent misdemeanors, that shouldn't have to be the case. People have lives. People have families, things that when they get brought in, swooped up all of a sudden, it threatens that. It threatens the precarious life that they already exist, and ultimately perpetrates and continues the oppression that they live under. So that's what cite and release would do. It would give these tickets. It would give something like, look, you're getting charged with this, but we're not bringing you in just yet, and you'll have your day in court. You can defend yourself, rather than you're free, but we're bringing you all the way across the city, and you got to find your way home later.
I think that is all true. That is all right. But I would actually, to tie it into the larger project, the way to make this simple is like what I'm in favor of is fewer arrests, fewer convictions, period. Right? Drive the numbers down. Shrink this system. This system is not good at anything. It's not good at the things. It's just the system needs to go, right? And how do we accomplish that on a day-to-day basis? Fewer arrests, fewer convictions. And so cite and release. So bail reform accomplishes actually fewer convictions. Because here's something that's interesting about bail reform for misdemeanors. In a misdemeanor case, we did bail reform here, and the jail population didn't really go down much. Because people in jail on misdemeanors, when they're standing there in jail, as far as the prosecutor is concerned, that person can be free that day, right? They can just plead guilty, though, right? It was a time-served system. So, all the complaints, but the difference with before reform is that they extracted a guilty plea and marked this person for life and drove them and destabilized their life by detaining them 2-3 days, driving them further and further down. So prosecutors are fine with people being released onto the street, right? They just want to mark them for life. And so that is the difference. And so with cite and release, we want to cut out that initial trip, period, right? That's fewer arrests, right? Fewer convictions is letting people out on bail fight their case. The dismissal rate shot up to over 50%, and then fewer arrests is give people tickets when the law allows you to in all categories.
Yeah, so maybe a little context here for people who aren't super familiar with like this process. I wrote, and you guys can jump in and correct me later, but I wrote a long article about jails some years ago, and it's something like maybe a little bit less than 2/3, or maybe like 60% or something of people in jail have not been convicted of a crime. This was 2015 when I wrote this, so maybe it's changed a little bit. But the overwhelming fact of jail is lots of people who are just being processed by the system. And as you say, one of the methods that prosecutors use to extract a conviction without having to win a trial is by pushing these guilty pleas, by shoving people in jail, putting up a giant cash bail requirement that, a lot of people can't raise, maybe many thousands of dollars. It takes them a couple of days to raise it. And by that time, they're so desperate to get out, they'll just plead. And even, it could be a case where, like, you would have only served a couple of days or a couple of weeks in jail anyways, and you've already been there that long, and so then you could just get out and have your time already served, as you say. So maybe you could explain how the cash bail settlement, as I'm not familiar with it, like how did that change the system? Is it like, are we getting rid of cash bail or like restricting it in certain categories? Like what's the story here?
It's a fresh story, right? I mean, y'all are getting it before even, I don't know what day this is going to come out, but
you'll be happy to know we have a breaking news drop. So
yes,
we're good.
Yeah, put it in all caps, must credit. So like, the bail settlement is a huge, 50, 60 page thing. And, but fundamentally, it accomplishes this. And this is only for misdemeanors in Harris County. The district courts, the felony courts, are being sued right now, and we couldn't come up with a universal resolution to it. There are reasons for that. They include the fact that even though Democrats control every bench, many of them are really bad Democrats, and they're not, Yeah, I know. And so it's going to take longer for felonies, right? And I have no control over that other than I do as a, organizer, activist. I mean, I'm outside for that. I mean, I'm inside somewhat in that I guess they'll take my calls, right? But I mean, I don't have a vote, right? I mean, I have to. So basically what we do is whenever anyone's arrested now in Harris County in Houston on a misdemeanor, we changed the local rules, and now we're locking in that change through a federal court order that will last forever. And it says that if you are arrested on a misdemeanor, right, these are cases like criminal trespassing, what I call pain assault, right, assault where the only allegation is that you felt pain, not that you have a serious injury, driving while intoxicated. It's a lot of cases, right? I mean, it's tens of thousands of cases per year. I mean, it's maybe 50 or so thousand cases per year across the whole county. And almost the goal was 85%, right? That 85% of people just be released automatically without seeing a judge, without anything, right? Just as soon as we can get the information and turn the person around, they're released. There's no discretion. There's no risk assessment algorithm, anything like that. It's just you are cut loose. And the only people that aren't are people that need to see a judge, right? And the two main categories are people accused in domestic violence situations who maybe need to hash out a protective order, a kind of a, I tell people every time someone's in my court, and they're released, and I impose some condition of bond, right? And I do it relatively infrequently compared to the previous ones, right? But who would just put year analysis on everybody. If you're criminal trespass, you had UAs. I mean, and all that's done, right? But I mean, if people can't figure out, I mean, it is like, it's like, all right, well, this person doesn't want you around, right? And like, this is the mechanism we got at the moment, So like. So it's family violence cases and DWI second cases, right, where the law requires some conditions of like monitoring. So that the people that need to see a judge. Everyone else is released, right? And we used this risk assessment previously developed by this Enron billionaire named John Arnold, which I think maybe we talked about in the last show, right? And it's so funny how he's a distant memory now, right? We don't use the billionaire tourist algorithm anymore. We just don't do that. And, it was so funny when we went into the jail and they were looking through the rule as it was written, and I personally supervised the implementation of this, right? And, they were like, oh, well, I mean, are we not using the risk assessment? And I just looked at them and kind of whispered, like, no. No, we're not using the risk assessment. Should we do one anyway in case the judge wants to see it? And I just look at them and I'm like, no. So that is bail reform. It basically is automatic release for almost everybody, right? And not shying away from calling it like automatic release. People are like, oh, it's catch and release. Well, it sure is. It sure is, right? I mean, all the police unions are already apoplectic about this. Obviously, it's people reach for the old tired lines, right? But no, there is no risk assessment, right? No, there is no. Yes, it is catch and release, right? People are innocent, right? The law says they're innocent, so we treat them that way.
Yeah, and then I guess, what if it's like a traffic ticket or sort of an analogy? I guess in certain circumstances there would just be like a penalty there that you could either just pay or show up to contest it, right? Is that what would happen thereafter?
Most people will not do any additional jail time on the cases, and they statistically speaking, right? I mean, the experience in my court, although I can't say what I'll do in a particular case, right? I mean,
right.
The numbers speak for themselves, And, but yeah, most people are not going to go back to jail, and in fact, most people will have their cases dismissed, right? I mean, the first culling layer is me, right? When I'm reviewing these sworn statements made by police, which used to be rubber stamped routinely, and now that I pour out routinely, right? I haven't even seen the numbers, but I mean, they're astronomical compared to before, right? I mean, it's called finding no probable cause, right? It's like disagreeing with the police officer's arrest decision, basically, from the bench. And I do that all the time, right? Because it's necessary, because they don't know what they're doing a lot of the time, right? And a job of the judge is, in our constitutional system, is police oversight, right? And an only criminal court judge, that is the main aspect of the job. So people are like, oh, why are you so critical of police? Like, why do you hate police? And it's just like, it's my job to provide oversight.
Yeah.
That's my job.
You want to be good,
and
get good.
One thing that's really frustrating in this whole aspect, though, is like, even though it comes to you, right? In my opinion, it shouldn't even be getting to you right now, because right now we have a district attorney, Kim Ogg, who is this, a self-appraised reform DA who runs an intake division. So here in Harris County, we have this system where if a cop wants to charge somebody, they have to get on the phone, call the DA's office. It goes to the intake division, if I understand correctly, right? And an ADA, an assistant district attorney in the DA's office in the intake division has to approve the charge. So that means there's a report that goes to the DA's office that approves the charge. Then it'll make its way to Franklin's court, for example. And I mean, the amount of cases that Franklin, Judge Bynum has been able to say no PC on shouldn't be at that level, because I think our district attorney should be doing their job. So there's an interesting dynamic that's been occurring between our claimed progressive DA and now our new slate of criminal court judges.
This is interesting, I think, for the audience to see how leftist socialists can infiltrate and change things even more together. So, Honorable Judge Bynum, how would things look different for thousands and thousands of people if you had like a Larry Krasner or Tiffany Caban with you, right?
Oh,
like how would that make things different for you?
It would make things tremendously different, right? I have to say, just as a preliminary, it's funny. I'm involved in electoral politics in an extreme way. I was on a ballot, right? And yet now the rules limit my involvement in electoral politics, right? And so we're coming up on an election year. The DA is up, and so I can be critical of the DA, but I can't, endorse or support any other candidate.
Right.
And so, take nothing I say as that, right? But I met Larry Krasner at Tiffany Caban's event, right? It was my birthday in New York, and I happened to be there for my birthday. And I went with Alex Vitale, who wrote The End of Policing. We went to the Tiffany Caban thing together. And met Larry for a minute. It's like, hey, I'm the socialist judge in Texas. And it would be amazing, right, if we didn't have to fight the DA about reform all the time. Like I hear the DA here might be, going to federal court to complain about some aspect of bail reform, while meanwhile she's going to the local the head of the county government and saying almost every meeting, right, that she needs 10 more prosecutors or 20 more prosecutors. And they're so overworked, and they used fraudulent numbers, which was exposed by the local paper to do it, where they were counting all these inactive cases where people had warrants out, and they were saying that was the total caseload of prosecutors in courts. This total inflated numbers, to say we're dying out here, and yet every time I see them, they're like engaged in like some dumb bullshit, and like it's just like they don't know how to deploy their resources well. They are chasing squirrels or something, like they no one knows what they're doing, and they just like run around with chickens with their heads cut off. So like if we weren't wasting energy trying to stop the dumb and bad things that they were trying to do, or trying to dodge when they are trying to come after us for no good reason, then yeah, we would be able to accomplish a lot more, I think. But instead, it's just it's just a mess here. I mean, we have someone who, says she's a reformer but is not. I mean, and the thing is, if she goes into federal court and complains about bail reform, then like I guess it's clear she's not even pretending anymore.
So that's a good way for the audience to like figure out. That's a specific thing that you can tell someone's not truly, I don't know if you want to use the word progressive, emancipatory, right? Not a radical, not a lefty. What are the things that a DA would do or not do that you could situate and say, okay, this is somebody on the side of the left and trying to help people rather than being part of the problem?
Well, I mean, it's not what Kim Ogg is doing, to be clear. First off, right?
It's easy. It's fewer arrests, fewer convictions.
Yeah, I mean,
that's how you shrink the system. The system has to go down. The police for years have been running up the numbers with CompStat and all these different systems, right? It is incredible to me going to these meetings with, people with stars on their shoulders, wearing polyester suits with stars on their shoulders, and the culture of lying that I observed as a defense lawyer. That on a case-by-case basis, I see different things in my court, but just like, let's call it a culture of dishonesty. Crime statistics are largely, made up. It is so much of the system is perpetuated based on a fiction, and so I think that dispensing with the fiction, but also driving down the numbers in any hard way, I mean, it's not a fiction how many bodies get booked into the jail. Right? That's not a fiction. It is a fiction, that, crime is on the rise, like generally speaking, it is. And, the numbers are cooked the way they need to be cooked. And it's just like the culture of doing that is so incredible. So like go to the numbers that matter and drive them down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the way to do it.
It's as simple as
and
no
demand
charges.
they do
No charges on so many of these things. So like when Franklin mentioned criminal trespass earlier, that's mostly used against the homeless, right? You show up in the wrong place because you have no other place to go and you live in a land of private property. Then you have, think about a charge of standalone resisting arrest, right? You're charged for resisting arrest, but you're not being charged with anything else. Seems a bit absurd, right? No charge on that. We have, things like possession of marijuana, right? Right now we have systems of pretrial diversions where you have to pay fees into it. But I mean, stop charging these things. I mean, quite frankly, being progressive is, like Franklin said, just drive it down, drive the system down, because right now it's working how it's intended, and we need it to not work how it's intended. The system comes from a system of chattel slavery to oppress us, and we need to turn it around. So what a good, emancipatory DA can do can turn us around 180, get us away from how the system's been acting.
Yeah, maybe a little more context here that might be useful. That it was the case in 2015 when I wrote my article, but I'm not sure it's the case still, but I believe it is, that the single leading cause of death in jails is suicide, and it's something like 2.5 times the rate in the background population. I think 40 per 100,000, and the background is like 12 per 100,000 per year. And most suicides that happen in county jails happen in the first 24 to 48 hours. Being arrested and thrown in jails is an incredibly traumatic experience. People think their life is ruined forever, and can just impulsively hang themselves and that sort of thing. And the people were maybe rightly suspicious of Sandra Bland, the lady who died in a that was a Texas jail, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and who knows for sure what happened there, but it is unfortunately very common for people who are otherwise fine to kill themselves when they get thrown in jail. And so, as you're saying, such an important. To just say, how can we possibly stop the number, just get this number down, to make it not be a sort of primary function of, just sort of warehousing all this social disorder, and make people actually deal with it, instead of just throwing the book at these tiny little offenses over and over again. But
yeah, it's a silly system. If we drive the numbers down, it just gets exposed for how silly it is. We've done bail reform, and now the dismissal rate is well north of 50%, right? Which really raises the question, what is this all about? What is this system of pain all about if over half the cases are dismissed? And what reformer DAs would say is oh, well, they're dismissed because we offer diversion, intervention programs or whatever, right? And so that actually, right, we're still we still count it, that's what it's all about, right? It's about they're diverting fees from the courts to DA's offices, right? So instead of paying court costs, right, you pay a program fee to the DA's office, right? It used to be here that, just talk about what a fake reformer DA we have, right? It used to be here that everybody a common charge is theft by check, right? It's a ridiculous charge, right? In the sense that it's very difficult, right? And I can keep, look, I can hear the cases, right? I'd be shocked if everyone ever got to trial, right? But basically they have to show that you knew your bank balance at the moment you wrote the check. And almost all these cases are people buying groceries at the grocery store, writing a check. And they sent a certified letter to the address on the driver's license, but it didn't go through, and then they didn't hear from the person, and then they file a criminal case, right? And it used to be that if the person showed up after being arrested and spending 2 days in jail for bouncing a check, that the DA would allow them to pay restitution. I'm doing the air quotes on the on the Skype,
yeah.
And they'll dismiss the case. I say restitution in air quotes. I guess with a check case, it was never. It's funny when they ask for restitution in credit card cases. I always think it's funny, because the finance industry has written that money off, But they're oh no, you must make Chase Bank 100 cents on the dollar whole,
You owe them 13.
When Chase Bank is. Yeah, they're oh, Chase Bank is 100 cents on the dollar. How quaint, we don't do that ourselves. But so now the DA's office requires you to enter a program for your theft by check dismissal and pay a program fee, and then pay the restitution to Kroger or HEB. or Walmart. It's most commonly Walmart.
It's a scam, frankly. So I mean, the whole time I've been thinking of Foucault's Discipline and Punish and just all the ways of control and just like, so even if it's not just a scam to make money off of poor people and just, or mark them, even if you don't process them, you're going to mark them for life and control them in other ways. What are some of the ways that, like, at the very least, liberals or conservatives alike need to say these are bad, poor people, and we need to at least put them through some training programs to make them feel ashamed of themselves and educate them so they're not such terrible people? Like, what are some of the kind of disgusting ways that go beyond mere throwing people in cages that needs to be purged or fought?
Oh man, well, it is. Now that I turn my attention out from the bail stuff, it is a very timely question, because my attention's been divided, right, and it's been kind of on those other things. But one thing that I'm running into a lot is the whole probation system, where people are put on probation, and the thing is, I'm reviewing these probations from before I went on. Something I've pioneered is the 2-day probation. Right, you're on probation for 2 days, right? And I'm going to early terminate it today. The reason it's 2 days is because the system can't take the start date and the end date being the same day. So I was like, I put you on probation for 1 day, and they were like, Judge, we can't do that. And
is that like a technical software problem?
Yeah. And so I'm like, all right, I'll make it a 2-day probation, then I'll terminate it today because you're halfway through today, and the law says that halfway through you can terminate it. So.
Boom.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, I like all the people on these like long probations where, they have the risk assessment. My God, I don't order it, but all this backlog of cases that come up where people get arrested for shoplifting at the Walmart, let's say, right, and then test positive for marijuana. And then suddenly are ordered to go to intensive outpatient treatment because they tested positive for marijuana, and they file these reports. And I feel like half the reports I get from the probation department are like, well, we recommend like extending for 1 year to pay fees. And I'm like, no, let's terminate today. In fact, like what on earth? Like this person had an appointed lawyer. And you're ringing them up for how much a month in fees? $200 a month in fees. And so the e-carceration, the probation, and even if you do bail reform wrong, it replicates the same problems that exist on probation.
Yeah.
Where everyone's supervised, everyone has an ankle monitor, everyone's getting UAs, and you're not locked in jail, you're just in an open air, cheaper for the government cage. That is also richly like lining the pockets of private contractors.
It's like we're automating incarceration.
Yeah.
It's like you incarcerate yourself, motherfucker, and we'll keep making money off of it.
Yeah, and you pay for it. We're tired of paying for it, right? But we're not going to get rid of the incarceration, It is so, I mean, that's why it's so important for us to be in the room when these things are being discussed, Because if we're not, then I mean, it makes a difference me being in the room. I can't. I have to say the Serenity Prayer all the time. I can't control what everyone else does, but I can put it in front of them, and I can tell them in a different way, and I can engage them and just like open their mind to another way that might be better. Sometimes these things are done because they're stupid.
Does that work? Have you seen that work?
Yeah. Oh, over and over again. Yeah, just like
That's
being
good.
in the room is really important.
Good.
Where, it definitely makes a huge difference. And let's say something else, I'm so proud that I think, the court coordinator who runs my court, I met through movement work. I met through DSA, And so it's so funny. We're both going to be out Thursday and Friday to go to the, and it's like, oh, why is court running at half speed? It's like, oh, there's a socialist convention. Never have the words been said.
I love it.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, we are the most competent court. Like we run the docket the fastest, partially because we waive people's appearances. We don't make people do the grind, and like all kinds of things. And so if we're not winning you over in the room on just, the purity and the beauty of our ideology, we'll win you over just on competence, right? Like if that's what you're looking for, and that is what a lot of people are looking for. It's like, oh, like you look and sound like you know what you're doing, and we do. And so I'm going to listen to you. There are all kinds of ways to persuade people and to be influential in a room of people.
Yeah.
Of course.
And
it's not always like prison abolition versus being a reactionary and opening concentration camps.
That's interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like you said, okay, things are faster because like you're just sort of not doing things that other judges are doing, but is it also the case that you're just like going through the paperwork, like all the procedural stuff more efficiently as well? And if so, why do you suppose that is?
Well, part of it is because we, William, the court coordinator, and I work together at my law firm, and we do automation together, and like, I don't know, we just are younger people, and we know how to like work the computer better, for lack of a better, And like we'll take an email, and I think that informality has all kinds of benefits, where I'm just like, there aren't layers to go through something, and we just work better. It's just like a more pleasant place to be, and I think that also, like, we work better, but it's a more pleasant place to be because it's funny, like putting these things into action looks like, on a day-to-day basis, it looks like pretty kind and pretty informal and pretty, even for the prosecutors in the court, to be honest, right? Like, I'm not, like, the environment in the court is not one of control and oppression, right? I'm trying to actively cultivate an opposite one. And I can't, like, be cracking down on somebody in the room, but then telling everybody else you're fine, right? I mean, that was in some ways what was happening before, just with different characters playing different roles, like everyone everyone's held accountable. Defense lawyers have to work, prosecutors have to work, but like, it's just a nice place to be. So if you're not particularly ideological, right? If you're just working at the courthouse, my place is a nice place to be because people aren't getting hammered for the most part. It's just not that like strict and oppressive an environment, and people love it.
Yeah.
Although if people were getting hammered in a fun way, that would make it even better, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, I do have a bottle of
That's the
tequila
next
back
step.
in my chambers. I figure that's
the next
I don't-
socialist vision, right? Mediation through the booze, lowering.
yeah,
the,
just have
kind
it
of,
like let's just come in the back and have a drink. Like, can we like
Let's
we
work
don't
this
need
out.
we don't need all this. Let's have a community circle back in the office. Like, and
makes
then
a lot of
dismiss.
sense.
We want to work towards those things too, right? These alternative dispute resolution type things. I mean, we have 4 years. We have 3.5 left, right? And we gotta like inside outside. We got to come up with these alternatives because it's not enough just to deconstruct the thing, right? We got to
That's right.
also
positive
like,
vision.
yeah, we got to build something else, because if you just pull back, then what if there's nothing left and people want something done, right? I mean, the cops have a plan, and they'll be like, oh, like, call us. The problem was when you stopped calling us.
Yeah.
Calling it.
Right.
Yeah, it's the natural conclusion of this work, and I think at Socialist we kind of it's step 2 is easy, right? It's like, well, what's the criminal justice system trying to solve? It's like, it's a bunch of social problems. So if you get rid of the criminal justice system, all of a sudden you realize you have all these social problems that could be solved through the kind of policies that we advocate for, right? Criminal trespass is like, well, let's give people houses. It's way cheaper too.
Yeah.
We have theft by check. It's like, well, people don't have money for food. We have, people killing themselves in the jails. Well, Harris County Jail is the largest mental health provider in the county. It's like, well, let's give people health care. Let's have something like Medicare for all. And in fact, I think Franklin, when we were campaigning, you're like, you know what? I'm for Medicare for all. Like, let's a judge campaigning on Medicare for all because it's all connected.
Beautiful.
I did.
It's related. It's all.
Yeah, I
connected.
talk about it
That's right.
all the time. I talk about it all the time in court.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people talk about, and I tell people in court too that, like, I had someone say the other day in court that I was like, they wanted to sign up for jail time. And I was like, well, why would I sign off on that? I don't, like, what good is it going to do you to go to jail? Like, I don't want to sign off on that. And she was like, well, at least I'll have, like, a meal and a hot shower. Damn. And I was just like, I'm so, like, I don't think anybody should have to live that way. Yeah. Like, I don't. I mean, and saying that, like, literally on a pedestal, right? But like that means something to people to hear that, that's like, that is wrong. Like, that should not be. And like, whenever that is presented anywhere in society, if it's in a court, if it's in a shelter, it should be the person responsible should say, oh my God, like, that should not be.
Yeah, that's interesting, Franklin, because it occurs to me that in your position, traditionally, you're a representative of the state and therefore, the common good in society to adjudicate responsibility and say you are morally culpable. But instead, you're in a position where you could say, you know what? The state has failed you for not providing you shelter and food, and we are sorry. We have failed, and I'm sorry that you're here in part because of that.
I say sorry to people all the time. And I don't think that's very common for judges, I mean, like, I'll look at someone's record and be like, you should have been released by now. Like, yes. I'm so sorry you weren't. I'm going to email someone and, make sure that this is looked into, because you should not be here right now. You should not be in Orange. You should be out.
It's absolutely called for, too. It is our fault. It's our fault that we've not provided these things. And it's so powerful. Like, there's this idea that you talk about, Franklin, in your court, treating people as humans. Right, treating them as like there's that personal connection. I heard from a criminal defense attorney the other day who went in your court saying that you look at the person when they walk up to the bench. You look at the defendant, you listen to them. You're not on the computer. An interpreter said this too. You actually pay attention to them and you treat them as a human. And I think that right there is the first time that we give that message of, everything up to this point was not necessary. An alternative is possible, right? An alternative where you're treated with respect, with dignity, you have some sort of agency, you're a human, and you're not something to be casted away. So this is the crux of the whole problem is, they show up to the bench and all of a sudden, everything up to this point, it's like, actually, no, we're going to put the brakes here. It's the very last step, too. It's for a lot of people, I think this has been crucial to have you on the bench, Franklin, and save lives ultimately. Right. This is often the very last stop on a very bad journey for a lot of folks. And for the first time in Harris County, maybe we have somebody who truly gets it, who truly can stop it. And that is powerful. And that's something that we can talk about when we organize an instantiation of our vision already in a system that cares about people. Incredibly powerful.
That's beautiful, man. I have a question, maybe, sort of getting towards the end here, for you, Bryan. We've heard a lot from Franklin about kind of, half a year on the bench, dealing with, seeing the business end of the dysfunction of the United States, like right up close in your face every day. What's it sort of been like for you, as a kind of like, who was that fellow? Lewis Howe, who was like one of FDR's political advisors in the early years. Being a guy who's like sort of associated, sort of one of the brain truster type people, seeing that and being like one leg in, one leg out of this kind of enterprise.
I think there's something really kind of emancipatory in it, and not in a way that's self-aggrandizing, but rather, I'm not special, right? The people who I've learned from as great organizers, they're not particularly special either. They're just fully expressing their capabilities as humans. And there's something to be said for like these kind of amateurs, right? Like my education is in mathematical biology. When I was 16, yeah. I did booking at a music venue, right? I now work in Social Security disability law, and then I do stuff with Franklin and criminal justice, right? This is a lot of things. And in that regard, I think there's something to be said about everybody's capacity to do this work, right? Everybody's capacity to be able to see the world around them, to say that, wow, this is all messed up, and to do something about it, and to figure out how to do that, and to come together, work with people who are your neighbors, who agree with you, who think like you, and whoever, come together and actually enact something. And I think that's been the experience so far. One that isn't necessarily like, oh, well, somebody associated with something that's really cool. It's like, well, I think we all together, it's an example of how everyone can be, right? It's a true expression of democracy. That's the lesson to really be had, if anything, about me. I'm not particularly special. I am just like many other people, being an example of what you can do if you have people power and a vision for a better world, I think.
That's beautiful, Bryan. It reminds me of Marx and the German ideology, and how, in capitalism, it's very easy to be alienated, right, from your labor and from other things, and just do one thing, and that's all you do, and you're not really fulfilling your full humanity. But what you're saying there is a beautiful thing, because what you're saying is the problems posed by capitalism and the state and incarceration and all these things that are bound up with the things you're fighting can, as hard as it is, unlock the potential of each human being in solidarity working with other activists to draw on all the things that make us human to combat that enemy, right? Like, you have to have empathy, you have to have humility, you have to have strategy, you have to unlock in yourself all these different things. And in a way, you are enacting the very thing that capitalism is trying to suppress in the fighting of it. And that's a beautiful, awesome example that should give us hope and hopefully cultivate the desire and the will to face the impossible, like you guys are both doing. That's a beautiful thing that you just said. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, just for the listeners, as you listen to this great show and you think about these ideas and looking at the world around us and, sociology, politics, all of these things, you can take part in that. You can affect change. I would say join DSA, but join anything, take part and enact this vision. And the first way you do that is to start talking to people. Because what did Franklin do in the campaign? Well, we went out in front of the jails and started talking to people about their experiences with the jail system. And that was the most powerful thing we did, because we went right to the people who were most affected. And those people, we didn't teach them anything. They taught us. We learned from them. Stories of calling them afterwards, and they were crying, saying, for the first time, I can vote for somebody who really believes in me. And that simple act of empowering people is I don't know how to describe it, but it's very emotional to take part in that. It's something liberating for yourself.
Powerful.
So I recommend, go out there, look up something, look up the local DSA meeting, go out to the next meeting and try to get something done, because in that way, the world doesn't feel dark anymore. It feels like there's something on the horizon, and it's good for your mental health. I can tell you that.
Yeah,
and also bad.
Well, don't.
It is good and bad.
Yeah, it turns out contradictions.
Yeah, right,
we live in a society, Franklin.
But it is good. Overall, it is good. And Bryan kept me going when, look, I just am some dude too, right? I'm just some lawyer. I'm some criminal defense lawyer who showed up to a DSA meeting, honestly, this is never in the plans for me. And I could have never done it without having joined DSA. I would have never done it. I would have never engaged with Democratic Party politics if I didn't have my own, group, hook, whatever, support. Support, right? Go get involved. Go do something. Like, we're in a race to make a better world. This is actually, Bryan, the best moment of the campaign for me was one day when I bought a new iPhone to return it, right? I was like, I have 2 weeks now to use this new iPhone in the return period. So let's go film something with this badass camera. Because we hadn't filmed anything, and so we went down to the bayou, to the banks of the bayou, where the jail is built on. This huge jail complex is built on the banks, and so I went down to the banks of this bayou that flooded, and that we were living in the wake of this flood. We still are. And Harvey relief, Houston DSA was really involved in, right? Hurricane Harvey, right? And I was like, look, just like it's like. I can barely leave a voicemail message. I don't know why I like thought it's like, oh, we'll just like shoot something in 5 minutes, right? No, it's not scripted. It's like Curb, right? You just show up and act it out. But something we said, right, after many, many takes, right, there was just one great one, right, that just came out of nowhere, right? And I said something that I had never said before in any of the others. And it was that we don't have to wait for rising waters to shut these jails down. We can do it ourselves. And, you know, just like tying together climate catastrophe and like the limited time, like, you know, there's no time to be anything but like show up and do your best and build it as fast as you can. You know, we made bail reform happen in Harris County, in the third largest county in the country, in 6 months. Right. And the thing is, we had a temporary solution up within two and a half. And it's working. And everyone said that we couldn't do it that fast, you know, and we did, because we have no choice but to move this fast, you know. And maybe that is the bad for mental health. It's because it's too much.
Hey, well,
hang in there, brother.
Yeah. Abolish jail sent for my iPhone.
Yeah. Sent for my ex iPhone.
I did.
That I sent back.
I returned it.
Franklin, we got to get you some like weekly massages and acupuncture or something.
Yeah. I'm gonna go.
You gotta be in for the long haul, brother.
Gonna go back to yoga. It's, you know.
That's right.
90s-tastic.
Yoga is a form of solidarity, it turns out.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know, the yoga studio up the street now is like got bought by some larger yoga company, and now they're like traded on the NASDAQ. And that actually feels like more honest to me. You know, I'm like, okay, I'm like, I can do this now, you know, because I'm just basically going to the gym with a different aesthetic, you know? Yeah. And so I feel more comfort with the yoga studio now.
You should buy some shares. Get your yoga index fund going.
That's right. Yeah. It's like BLIS on NASDAQ, you know.
Yeah.
But hey, yoga might be part of the new alternative dispute resolution options. You never know.
Yeah. 10 yoga classes and dismissed.
Having marital strife? Go to yoga, people. Come on.
Yeah, look, whatever works.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever does it.
And you heard it here, folks. Judge Franklin Bynum is in the pocket of big yoga. He's sending all his prisoners to yoga mediation.
That's right. As long as it's not like one of these yoga programs in jail, you know, like whenever I see these programs in a jail, it's like, we have a ribbon cutting we have a new veterans pod in the jail. And it's just like, well, like, I am in favor of treating people better. You know, I am in favor of more humane treatment, but like, how about like just not having a pod?
Right, yeah.
How about just like have a ribbon cutting because we closed a pod?
Yeah, Bernie's gonna.
We have one fewer pod.
Bernie's gonna be out on the trail like 99% of the judges are in pocket of big yoga. It's a shame. I don't like it. It's not good. It's not good.
Wait, that reminds me, Brian. I heard that you have a Franklin impression as well. Is that true?
Yeah, you know, we're gonna break it down, right? We're gonna do it good, and you know, I'm the good judge.
Yeah.
It's good. What's missing? What's missing is the hands, right? I can see you on the video.
Yeah, you got to see the hands. That's true.
I use my hands a lot. Yeah.
As a Greek, I encourage that.
Yeah,
that's better.
It's emphatic. Yeah. We have a lot of feelings, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Ryan, I don't know if you have anything left, but I like where we're at now because we're kind of embracing the full humanity of the silliness, the humor that's required to deal with the chaos and frustration and hope and amalgamation of feelings that is the Leftist Project. So I don't know, buddy. Did you have anything left to ask?
I don't know. No. I will recommend Floating Down the River. Just did that earlier today.
Highly recommend. Yes.
Yeah, just by.
But yeah,
if you
nature is awesome. I watched Veronica Mars and read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, which is less therapeutic than the river trip, I would imagine.
But any last comments from you guys?
Yeah, a better world is possible, and join DSA.
All right. Yeah, especially Houston.
Yeah. Houston is, we got our own model. I would say, explore, like I think that like having a sense of playfulness about this and not being too rigid, like I never thought I was going to run for judge, right? I mean, but it's like, oh, like here's an opportunity to do something, here's this thing. And so like we should all approach this with like a playfulness and with an open-mindedness about like what to do next. And you can't pre-decide what, I mean, like
That's
we're all
right.
surfing this wave of reality and material conditions and humanity, and it does take a sense of humor and a sense of play to do it. If I'd die if I didn't have that.
Yeah.
And relax a little bit. People are, I think, very on the left, sometimes very anxious about controlling the future, knowing what's going to happen, picking the most righteous thing to do, the number one thing that'll effectuate change. It's like, one of my favorite poets is a Greek Nobel laureate, Odysseus Elitis. He says, each to his own weapons, or each to her own weapons. So it's like, find something, go with it, and just, we're in this together.
So in other words, from each according to ability.
Exactly. I can't think of a better thing to end on than that.
Yeah. Well,
Thank
thanks.
you.
I really love spending time with y'all.
same.
Yeah, right.
It was really great
Same.
to be on.
Yeah.
We got it's just so familiar. I sit down and particularly having Bryan here. It's just like sit down at the coffee table.
Yeah.
Well, we're really happy to be able to join that, and I hope we get to do it again before long.
Yeah. We got to check in a
Thanks for all
year
you do.
to see how you're doing. Check on them yoga
We will.
stocks.
We will definitely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I hope you got to start levitating by the end of the year. That's where you gotta,
I'll work on it. We'll rebuild the commune. I'll see Rajneesh Puram. I'll go to
I love it.
All right.
Perfect.
All right,
Cool,
guys.
guys.
See you next time.
See ya.
All right.
Bye.
Last but not least, we have a friendly reminder that we have a Patreon. You can support the show with $5 a month and get an extra episode every week. We really appreciate the support, and it helps us keep this going.